Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. For me, this year has been incredible in terms of discovering more talented Aussie authors. I've spoken to quite a number of debut authors, very well-established authors, and many who fall in between. Despite the trying circumstances we've been living in over the last 6 months, people are turning to books more than ever, a testament to the healing power of stories and their continuing relevance in a world that seems increasingly troubled. And one of the genres people seem to turn to in droves is romance, a so-called evergreen genre characterised by stories of love, hope and happy ever afters, which is lucky for my next guest. Queensland-based Amy Andrews is an award-winning USA Today best-selling author who has written over 70 contemporary romances and sold over 3 million books. She has written for both traditional and digital markets and has been translated into more than a dozen different languages. Her stories have all the feels and range from the sassy, comical and quirky to emotionally gritting and sizzling. I recently had the pleasure of reading the first of her Credence Colorado Series, a book called Nothing But Trouble, which was a page-turning friends to lovers story that definitely had all the feels. A strong and sassy heroine, a handsome but somewhat misguided hero, and a cast full of interesting supporting characters made this a wonderfully entertaining read. I can't believe I've never read one of Amy's books before, but as I said, the joy of this podcast has been uncovering more Aussie authors and showcasing their work. And so it gives me very great pleasure to welcome Amy to the podcast today. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Claudine. How are you going? Thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Amy, I read somewhere recently that you've just typed the end on your 80th novel and that you've written 63 novels in the last 12 years. That's a phenomenal achievement. Absolutely incredible.
When you look back at it like that, it does seem like quite a lot of quite a lot of books to have written. Yes, I just typed the end on book 80, so that's gone off to my editor. So I've been writing I've been published since 2004. I've been writing for longer than that. So I've been doing it for a while as well. Average is about, I think, 4 or 5 books a year, and that's about what a lot of romance writers are writing, on average. So
when you look at the numbers this way, are you surprised or ever worried that you'll run out of ideas?
no, not really. It never really worries me. There's always just ideas going on in my head. I always say I have these ideas in a holding pattern, like how planes go in holding patterns if they're, the airport is clogged up and yet they're not allowed to land. So I feel like they've got all these ideas just circling in my head until the sort of controller up there gives them permission to come into land, and then it's sort of their turn, that plot, turn to have a go on the page. So far, no, I've not run out of ideas, and I've already got the next sort of 4 or 5 plots bubbling away in my head. So fingers crossed that doesn't happen. Laura Roberts has written a couple of 100 books, so I don't think she's run out of ideas yet. So I hopefully I'll be okay.
Amy, how long does it take to complete a novel from start to finish, would you say?
It depends on what I'm writing. So I write both category romance, which is sort of 50 to 60,000 words, and they're the kind of Mills and Boon style books. And they usually take about 4 to 6 weeks. And then there might be some editing that goes in the back and forth. So maybe from the time I start to the time the book gets a go ahead, it might be 3 months, but the writing will actually take about a month to 6 weeks. And then books like Nothing But Trouble, which are about 90,000 words, they usually take me about 3-ish months to write, 3 to 4 months to write. Depending on, I've written some slightly longer at 100 odd K, and then some slightly, shorter at about 80K. So it does depend very much on the word count. I try to write about, when I'm writing, 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. So if I do that consistently, you can get through a book reasonably quickly.
For an aspiring writer like me, to hear those kinds of numbers is really inspiring and daunting in equal measures.
Well, it's my job. This is what, I have contracts to fulfill, and I just have to sit my bottom in the chair every day and write. Otherwise, no words get written.
Yeah, yeah. I completely see where you're coming from. So, do you work on novels simultaneously or only one project at a time?
Well, it's funny you should ask that because I have been working on book 79 and book 80 simultaneously, and I have done it in the past. I don't really like to. I like to finish one project and then go on to the next because, as I was saying before, there's always plots bubbling up, going on in my head anyway. So I prefer not to, but yes, I have done that,
Mm.
and I'm assuming that I will continue to do that on and off throughout, the rest of my career. It's not my preferred way to write, though.
Let's talk about Nothing But Trouble, which, as I said in my introduction, was a highly entertaining read. Now, this was published last year, so I wanted to ask you what inspired you to begin this series?
Well, that was very easy. My editor came to me, my editor at Entangled Publishing, which is a US-based company, came to me and said um, that she wanted to do, wanted me to do a series for them. And she had this idea about this little rural town that had run out of women essentially, and they launched a Facebook campaign to attract women to the community. And she wanted me to try, and because I had already written a series of rugby players, Australian rugby players, she wanted to try and work in the sports angle, which is why the hero ended up being a sports quarterback. So try to get some crossover from my Sydney Smoke readers into the new series as well. We actually work quite closely, my editor and I, on a lot of the plots. She has lots of great ideas, and we usually bash out a synopsis together and go back and forth with it. So that's sort of how that particular idea came along by my very creative editor who always proposes those sort of questions. What would happen if? The same kind of questions that all writers sort of pose themselves. What would happen if I did this or they did that? Or and book 2 and 3 are very similar as well. We work very closely on those plots, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through the 4th book at the moment.
Okay, so for those who haven't read Nothing But Trouble yet, can you tell me a little bit more about the story? I know you just touched on one of the aspects of the story, but yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, I thought it was really interesting because I think that sort of theme is quite universal about. You said in America, obviously, and they're American characters, but the theme of rural towns running down and shutting down because all the young people leave, go off to university and study, and they get jobs outside of the community, and they don't go back to their little hometowns. And so the towns die, and I felt like there's lots of rural communities in Australia who also face that kind of conundrum a lot of the time. So I felt like it was quite an easy thing for me to write. So it had that sort of overarching theme of a small dying country town who was trying to reinvigorate itself, bring in new blood, start new businesses, get back to be thriving again. So schools didn't have to close and more people didn't have to leave, and it becomes that kind of vicious cycle. There was sort of that aspect. And then there was the romance plot going on with the hero and heroine. He's an ex-quarterback, as I was saying. He's very, very rich. He's made a lot of money during his career and he's invested it wisely. And he's had this very long-suffering PA for the last 5 years who has her own goals and made a promise to herself that once she's earned a certain amount of money, and he pays her very well, she would be off doing her own thing, which was to go and live in California by the beach. And she's sort of finally there, and she's told him that she's leaving, and she has to he does put her through the mill quite a bit. She often has to buy flowers for ex-girlfriends and take tearful phone calls from women who he sort of went on 2 dates with and then decided he didn't want to see them anymore. So she's a little over it, and she announces she's leaving at the beginning of the book, and suddenly Wade is very much at a loss of what he's going to do without her, because she's just been, he's, as he said, he's a left tackle the entire time they've been together. And then his father has a problem with his heart, and he has to have some surgery done. And Wade is also in the middle of writing or supposed to be in the middle of writing his memoir. He got a big contract from a publishing company. And so he decides he's going to go back to Credence, back to his hometown, and write his memoir there and help out on the farm, help his brother and his father out on the farm so his father can stay rested up and do it there away from like women always wanting to date him, and because he's got no self-control and he can't just say no. And then the town comes up with this harebrained scheme of bringing in single women to the town to try and attract them to stay and live and open businesses. And suddenly all he can see is like more single women everywhere, and he does his level best to try and sort of persuade the town that's not what they want to do. But his mother and the town and his PA certainly have other ideas, and so he's just kind of hanging on and going along for the ride. And there's a nice little side romance too with his brother on the farm. He gets a little secondary romance going on as well. So I think there's a lot going on in it.
I understand that you travelled to Colorado for this story. So can you perhaps tell us what kind of research you had to do to bring this story to the page?
2018, I think it was. I travelled to Colorado, to Denver, where the Romance Writers of America conference was being held that year. And my editor, who we just spoke about before, happens to also live in Denver. I actually stayed with her for a week. And most people who set books in Colorado usually set books in the pretty rocky, snowy mountains where everything is lovely and, picturesque and, lots of people with lots of money and little tiny quaint villages and towns where cute little shops and little chocolate places are. And all I could see was this sort of, in my head was this little town that was just literally dying, and I wanted it to be really rural. So I said to my editor, could you take me out to Eastern Colorado? And she's like, what do you want to go to Eastern Colorado for? Nobody goes to Eastern Colorado. And because I knew it was only like a few hours drive away, I knew it wasn't like a huge ask. I guess somebody from Australia doesn't feel like it's a huge ask. I said, yeah, no, I don't want to set it in mountains. I want to set, this story in like literally just nowhere, in where nobody really ever goes to visit, or there's no tourism around. And so we took a road trip out one day, stopped at a diner along the way. So I was able to get that real small country diner experience. And yeah, it's really flat out there. And there's just, miles of nothing, just kind of grassland and sort of quite yellowed grass from under the sun. And there's a few little towns along the way. And I got a real sense of, took lots of pictures, and I got a real sense of what it's like out there, the vastness and the loneliness, but also that is, the sense of community that you get in small towns as well. It's really hard when you don't live in a place. You can write about it because, we have the internet these days, of course. So you can look up anything and look at any town. You can go to Google Earth and you can look at maps and you can go right down and look at pictures of places. But there's something about having lived in a place or been in a place that, sort of sinks into your pores or your soul or your whatever, that enables you to be able to, really accurately depict that. I know I've lived many years ago in the UK for a couple of years, and I feel much more comfortable setting books in the United Kingdom because I feel like it's quite natural to me. I know what it's like to live there. I know what the people are like. So I feel much more comfortable doing that. Whereas setting books in America, I feel less comfortable doing because although I've visited there, I've not really ever spent like long periods of time there. So being able to go and actually visit places that you're writing about just is so much better than reading about it or looking at pictures on the internet. It's really gold. There's nothing that you can do to replace it apart from actually going there and living there yourself. So
yeah, fantastic. I loved Cece. Now, she's the PA in your book, Cecilia,
yes.
or Cece was her name, the heroine. She's definitely someone who knows her own mind. How difficult do you think it is to continue to craft compelling female characters that aren't stereotypical? And do you think your readers' expectations of the female protagonist has changed in the time that you've been writing?
I think that romance in particular is a genre that really moves with the times. When I first started reading romance when I was 12, there was lots of kind of boss secretary kind of things happening, and gender roles were quite different. And I feel like that was reflected in romance, and I feel like all throughout the years, I've been reading romance. That's changed. Heroines have changed. They've got different jobs now. They've become more of their own people. The focus has switched around to not like needing a partner in their life, but that it enhances rather than, it's something that's nice to have rather than something that you have to have. I don't know that's necessarily changed in the time that I've been writing, because it's been relatively short, compared to the evolution of romance, for example. But I feel that romance is quite reflective of that, and therefore heroines are quite reflective of that now. I feel like we have way more kind of kick-ass, as they say in America, heroines are around now. I don't know if I tend to write kick-ass heroines, really. I think writing any character, not just heroines, is about being able to make them three-dimensional. That's the trick. If you can't make them fully rounded, like they can't always be perfect, or they can't always be all bad, or they can't always be all good, or people are multidimensional, and so your characters have to be multidimensional as well, and that goes for heroines as well. And I think that's just how I do it, and lots of writers do it, is you try to give your characters nuance and flaws and traits that make them individuals, rather than this two-dimensional sort of cardboard cutout character.
Tell me about your journey to publication, and how did a woman who lives in a sleepy seaside town in Queensland come to be writing books that are sold right around the world?
Well, it's a long and winding road to publication, let me tell you. I wrote my first book when I was 22, and as mentioned before, I was living in the UK. I was living in the UK then, and it was my first English winter, and hadn't got up above 0 degrees all week, and I was temporarily out of work, and I thought, what can I do that involves me not getting off my electric blanket? And I thought, I'll write that book that's in my head. And really, up until that point, I don't think I'd really realised that there was a book in my head. It was quite bizarre when I think about it now, but I just thought, yeah, that's what I'll do. So I sat down and I wrote that book. I wrote 5,000 words a day for 10 days. I wrote that book in 10 days, longhand. This is back in the days before anybody had, PCs on their desktop. And I sent it off to Mills and Boon. It never occurred to me I always wanted to write romance. I always knew it would be a romance, and that I would send it to Mills and Boon. I had always read Mills. I read lots of things, but I'd always been a big fan of Mills and Boon, and I just knew that if I was going to get a book published at all, that it would be stupid not to send it to the world's largest publisher of romance. And also at the time, that was really, your only option. It's not like it is today, where there's, all kinds of other options, like digital options, self-publishing, that sort of thing. So I sent it off, and it got rejected about 9 months later. And I always say that was the moment that I actually became a writer, and I became determined to become a writer. I sort of say that rejection made me bloody minded. I just thought, all right, okay, all right, well, I'll show you that I can write a book and you will buy it if it kills me. So 12 years later, I got my first book accepted by them, and that was probably my fourth full manuscript, I suppose, because of course I had, a career and kids and all that time as well, so I wasn't very prolific in those 12 years. When I got home to Australia, I decided, okay, I obviously don't know everything there is to know about writing a book. I'm obviously not going to write a book and it's going to sell and they're going to make a movie out of it. I'm going to make millions of dollars. So what can I do? Where there must be some place that can help me with this. So I went to the Queensland Writers Centre, and I asked, was there any romance writing support groups around? I found one in Brisbane, because we were living in Brisbane at the time. And I went to that, and through that I found Romance Writers Australia, and then I read lots of how-to books, and I went to lots of conferences and lots of workshops. And I essentially, I did my apprenticeship over 12 years. I, learned the craft of writing. Fast forward 12 years, and I got my first contract with Harlequin. That was in 2004. Now, Harlequin goes all over the world, and very soon I had, books. My very first ever translation was an Icelandic one, of all places. My very first book was Icelandic. So I was being translated all over the world, and that was, wonderful. It's been wonderful working with Harlequin. I think I've written 43 or something like that, Harlequin, Mills and Boon medical romances, plus some other romance as well, because I've got a nursing background. Plus, I've written for a couple of their other lines as well. So 2011, when indie publishing was really kicking off and things were really happening and the whole publishing industry was changing, I started to branch out a bit because I wanted to write not necessarily different stuff, but I wanted to write the stuff I was writing differently without such sort of tight strictures, I suppose, on what I could and couldn't say and what I could and couldn't do within the confines of a book. And I found Entangled Publishing, which is who Nothing But Trouble is published through. And I found other publishers that I wrote books for. So I kind of decided that I was really going to try and diversify, not put all my eggs in one basket, try to maximize my income streams, I suppose. Now I write for 3 publishers pretty consistently. So, and 80 books. So
incredible, really incredible. So on that note, I guess a lot of people who listen to this podcast might be interested to know whether or not you're a plotter or a pantser.
I am a little bit of both. I'm sorry not to be more definitive on one or the other, but I think I used to be more of a plotter when I was more of a newbie writer. I certainly sort of had character sheets that I used to fill out and that sort of thing. And particularly when I was writing medical romance, it was often a difficult line for me to work out what degree of medical as opposed to what degree of romance within a book. So those sort of things took me a while just to get a real feel for. But what I mostly do now is, for example, if I'm working with Liz from Entangled and we have this, she loves a synopsis, whereas I would rather write a whole entire book than write a synopsis. So
I think you're not alone there.
yeah. So so working to that, she's happy to write the synopsis that we've been talking about, and so I have that to work off. But I don't usually do that myself. I usually have an idea. Like I said, it's normally been percolating in my head, so at least I know how to start it. And what I found really good is Pinterest. Actually, I use Pinterest now for, it's not really plotting, but I'm able to do a board. I do a board up for every book, so I can put character inspirations there, and I can put setting inspirations there, and I can really have it there as a visual guide for me, which also helps me kind of crystallize in my mind as well what the book's about. So I often will refer to it while I'm writing as well, in case, just to get back to the basics if I kind of wander off piste a little bit, which can happen from time to time. I don't full on pants, but I do a little bit of visual plotting, I suppose. I've never had to dump half a book because I've gone, oh, well, that's really gone wrong. Now I have to start again. In fact, that even the thought of that makes me feel so physically ill. I want to vomit just thinking about it now. So I kind of fall in the middle of the road. I know people who plot who will write 20,000 words just plotting, and that also makes me want to vomit thinking about that. Look, everybody's process is their process. I totally understand that. But I like to have a little bit of control. I think it's good to have some idea in your head, because sometimes you can get a bit lost. And to actually go back and to whatever, like to your Pinterest page or to your notes that you've made and go, oh, that's what I was supposed to be doing. That's right. That can really help. So yeah, I'm a bit of a middle of the road person.
That's actually more common than you think. A lot of people I've interviewed say they kind of are a hybrid rather than falling directly in one camp or the other.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think anything in life, most people kind of tend to fall in the middle, don't they? Thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. So what does your typical day look like? You just told me that you write anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 words a day. So how does that come about?
What I wish would happen, how I wish it would go, is I would start at 9 and I'd write to about 5, and hey presto, there'd be 2,000 or 3,000 words written. So it doesn't quite go like that. I find the internet quite distracting, and I'm very bad with impulse control over that. So I do try not to. When I get on in the morning, I try to do all my emails, all my social media, that sort of stuff before I've started. And I do try to be writing by 10. I used to be a really fast writer, and I used to write a lot of words a day. I used to write about 5,000 words a day, 5 to 6, and I used to be quite fast. I'm actually getting slower as I get older, and the thought of having to write 5,000 words a day also makes me want to vomit now. If I have to sit down and write 5,000 words, I spend all day thinking, oh my God, I'm going to write 5,000 words, oh my God. And I write 800 words instead, because I spend all day thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do that? If I'm working on 2 books at once, I tend to try to do like 1,000 or 1,500 words on one, and then 1,000, 1,500 words on the other in the afternoon. So do morning, afternoon, sort of split with them. I think consistency really is key. When I'm writing, I try to, I sit down every day, and I often write on the weekend. And as I'm getting towards the end of deadline, like last week when I finished book 80, I think I wrote in those 2 days, I think I wrote 11,000 words.
Oh,
and I was just exhausted by the end of it all because and then I had to edit for 2 nights up till midnight.
Now, Amy, I understand that you also teach. Tell me about that, and how on earth do you fit those commitments with the kind of publishing schedule that you have?
I don't tend to do a lot of them, though. I have done the odd one, and I've done them at conferences. But I do feel, because I don't have a teaching background, so I feel like a bit of a fraud when I'm teaching anything because, yes, I do have experience, obviously. I am a bit plagued with insecurity where that goes. So I do try to sort of stick with basic things like Romance 101 stuff that I know really, really well. I'd much rather sit down with somebody in their manuscript and do a one-on-one critique with them. That's like much more my comfort zone. And I have done manuscript critique in the past, which I really, really enjoy. But I'd much rather just sit in a room and have people ask me questions and talk about writing than teaching. A lot of that stuff I feel like I don't even have. I remember I'd been writing for like 10 years and somebody said that the GMC was all wrong. And I was like, what's GMC? And they went, goal, motivation, and conflict. And I was like, oh no, what am I doing wrong? I feel like I see a lot of these things. I think, oh, I'm doing it all wrong. People are teaching all these things and I don't do it like that. And I'm doing it all wrong. What am I doing? And then I have these terrible kind of horrible moments of self-doubt where I'm like, oh, I should do it like that. Yeah, I'm a bit of a insecure mess when it comes to that sort of thing.
I would say that you're a more intuitive writer.
Okay, that sounds way better. I'm an intuitive writer. But one of my favorite authors is Jennifer Cruzy, and she does, she is incredible. She has this blog that she's really good at and she runs every day. She's got a massive fan base there and she talks about her process, and it's so intricate and involved, and I look at it and I think, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? I'm not doing any of this. So
you're clearly not doing anything wrong.
Writing can be terribly insecure thing to be involved in. You have to have quite a robust ego, and I actually really do. Like, I'm quite robust where lots of things are concerned to do with writing, but there's always doubt demons, and there's always, every single book, out of my 80 books, I've probably had quite a few rejected. So every single book, there's always that moment of maybe this will be the one that'll, totally bomb or won't be accepted, or my editor will hate, or, of course you never think maybe this will be the one that'll make me $6 million and get me a movie deal. It's always easier to think the bad things than the good things.
So your blurb about what's being a nurse is that you know things, anatomical things, and you're not afraid to use them. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to the topic of writing love or sex scenes for your books. Now, as a writer, I find this is something that people in the community have different views about. What is the right heat level for a story? How do you decide this? And given the genre that you write in, do you feel as if there's an expectation for you to be writing at a certain level of explicitness? Or is this more about the way the characters speak to you within a certain story?
Romance runs across the whole, spectrum of heat, from sweet, which they're now calling clean, which I don't like that terminology at all, because it makes it sound like therefore sex is dirty, which is just bizarre. So from a sweet romance where everything is quite closed door and you don't see beyond that, right through to rip the door off the hinges, and burn on a bonfire kind of stuff. And I tend to write at that end of ripping the door off the hinges. I think if you're a person who's new to romance and you're picking up, say me, for example, for the first time, if you don't mind hot stuff and you don't mind people who are going to use some bad language, foul language, then that's not going to shock you. But if you're somebody who's not into that, that will, really turn you off. So I think if you're a romance reader and have been around long enough, you soon work out which writers write to your taste, on the sweeter end or on the sort of more hot end. And I think for me, certain lines, if you're running for a certain line, will dictate that. Like for example, Harlequin have a sweet line, so obviously that dictates, the level of heat in that line. The particular plot might dictate the level of heat. Like a lot of historical romances might not, have a lot of really hot, sexy, although a lot of them do as well. But to me, I write contemporary characters, and whatever anybody thinks morally about whether, people who love each other should or shouldn't have sex before they're married, or they should get married or they shouldn't, or whatever, the fact of the matter is people do. And I think sex is a natural, normal part of any evolving relationship. And I want to explore that in my books and in my characters. And I want to read books where that's explored as well. You can have books have a great sexual tension, just amazing sexual tension. That's so good that you don't even necessarily need that payoff, because it's just so good. I mean, I like to have that payoff when I read. I like to give my readers that payoff when I write it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be so. But I feel like my contemporary characters, anyway, dictate the fact, that they're going to be having sex and lots of it. I think, in all new relationships, people tend to have, a lot of sex and a lot of really good sex, particularly right there at the beginning. So I want to explore that. I want to write about it. I want to read about it. I want to go inside the bedroom. Always, I've been the person who always looks for relationships in any book that I read that's not romance. Obviously, you're going to get that in romance. Any television series, any movie, I'm always interested in finding out where the romance relationship is in the plot. I remember even as a little kid watching Star Wars, and I didn't care about the Death Star or about who Luke's father was, or about those swords that go through the air. His name just escapes me now. All I was just about Han and Leia. Even then, as like an 8-year-old. I could suss out that was, what was going on. To me, contemporary romance with kind of characters I write, I think it goes hand in hand. I don't have a problem with writing sex scenes. I think I'm quite good at it. I'm not embarrassed by it. I feel like people have sex, and it's just, a natural part of things. So I always say in any of the workshops that I give is that sex scenes aren't physical scenes, they're emotional scenes. Yeah. Getting naked with somebody is a moment of great vulnerability for characters, and that's a way, it gives you a way to explore those characters even deeper. And it's not about which bits are going into what at what time, although of course that's part of it. It's about how that makes a person feel, and how after this has their relationship changed. Sex scenes are emotional scenes, they are not physical scenes. You have to care about the characters that are having. If you don't, they could be having the most amazing head-banging sex, hanging from chandeliers, doing all wonderful things. But if you don't care about them, then who cares? It's just, the actual physical aspect doesn't mean anything if you don't make your readers, actually, if you don't invest them in your characters. They don't have to like them necessarily even, but they have to be invested in them.
Not to belabor the point, but you were talking about the sort of different heat levels. You've got the behind closed doors sweet romance, and then you've got the rip the door off the hinges type of love story. So the interesting thing about Nothing But Trouble was that there was both. We had the main character, the main love story, and then we had a little interesting subplot there with Wade's brother and a girl that came to town as part of that, attracting women to the small town. It was an interesting contrast for me, and I'm guessing this was deliberate on your part.
I actually did write a full sex scene for Wyatt and Jenny, for the brother, as part of that story. And then my editor said, actually, I feel like this is a bit voyeuristic. I feel like they're not the main, they're not the main story. And actually, having this full sex scene just feels a little off. It doesn't feel right. It feels like we're just, it's not about them changing it, like I was saying before, how, sex should change relationships and up the stakes. And, we're not getting that in this relationship with Wyatt and Jenny. So I actually took out the full scene on that, and we just faded to black, on that scene where they're up in the loft in the haystack. So that kind of gets faded to black. So that was a decision that was made after it had been written. I have a a private readers group on Facebook, and I've just last week released that scene for them to read the whole scene. So they've got the whole juicy because Wyatt is a virgin too, so that's why I wanted to write that scene. Really, he was my first ever male virgin that I'd written, so I kind of wanted to write that scene just from that kind of interesting perspective itself, and it didn't make the cut.
You mentioned that you're a member of Romance Writers of Australia, as am I. So yes. I wanted to ask, how important is a writing tribe to you as a writer?
It's like oxygen. It's so important. I would not be published without Romance Writers of Australia. Absolutely. They're the first people that I found. In the first instance, the things that I learned that you can learn craft-wise from finding your peers, finding your support group, finding those people that are writing the same thing as you, things you can learn about craft and about the business is, I don't think you can even calculate that. It's just incredible. And then there's the conferences that you go to, which is one just big one, sort of weekend or 3 or 4 days of all getting together and just learning stuff. And you come away so, hyped up and amped up. But it's also the day-to-day support that you get from your writing buddies. There's certain groups that I belong to where you can chat with writing friends about different aspects of the business. Because writing is such a solitary such a solitary thing. You're literally sitting at home alone all day on your computer. I don't go into an office every day and get that support like people who work, at normal jobs do. So you have to rely on the online community of your writer friends to do that for you. And it's just, it's vital. It would be very, very lonely thing to do without that kind of support. And how people actually did it before the internet, I have no idea.
Yeah,
it just boggles my brain.
As we mentioned before, there are many writers who listen to this podcast. Now, given your incredible publishing record, what do you think would be your top 3 pieces of advice for anyone out there looking to get published?
Oh, this is one of my favourite subjects. Okay, so first thing I would say, and I know people would roll their eyes at this, but it is so true. You have to read to be a writer. You just have to, whatever genre you want to write in, you have to read in. I say read every single thing you can, every single thing you can that's been released, in the last 1 or 2 years. Don't read something from 5 or 10 years ago because, of course, read it if you want it for enjoyment, but if you want to read it for just pure analysis alone, always try to keep up to date with all the latest releases. That's kind of way you just learn from osmosis about the genre expectations, and you work out kind of where you fit by reading. And it's good for your brain to do that as well. It's good just to always keep up to date with what's going on in the business, what's being printed, what's being published, what's working, what's popular, what's not. Yeah, I guess join a writers organization. Find other people like you out there in the world. There are other people out. It's tempting to, it is tempting to think, well, there's nobody else, but there are people out there. So fun. So join RWA or join, whatever you're writing in. Find those people, and then I would say go to a writing conference, whatever, whether it be Romance Writers Australia or go to a face-to-face place. There are amazing things. You'll learn a lot just in a short period of time. You're able to, usually they'll have editors and agents at conferences like that where you can pitch manuscripts to, and you can develop a network of contacts and of friends that are can be invaluable, for the rest of your career. I love talking to new writers. If you're going to I always get a manuscript assessment is a really good thing that you can do, but be very careful who you give your manuscript to. Don't give your erotic romance manuscript to a literary fiction place that only does those kind of manuscripts. You need to make sure whoever you give your manuscript to knows the genre you're writing in, knows the conventions of that genre, reads in that genre a lot. Unless you've got a really, really thick skin, they have no idea what they're talking about in relation to your particular genre. They can give you really, really bad information and set you off on the wrong track, and they can cost you a lot of money by doing it as well. So always check who you're sending your stuff to, make sure they know what they're doing. Look around, ask other people if they've been there, if they've had the same experience with a particular person.
So Amy, what's next? What's your next release?
I'm doing a crossover between my Sydney Smoke series and the Credence Colorado series, and it's called Playing with Trouble. It's coming out in mid-October, and then I've got a book called All's Fair in Love and Chocolate. It's coming out in mid-November, I think. And then, of course, I'm actually re-releasing a bunch of my old medical romances that I've got the rights returned to. They're just on Amazon, just through KU. So one of those is coming out next week. So I'm re-editing, recovering, retitling. Pretty busy.
Yeah, sounds like it. Absolutely brilliant. Amy, if listeners wanted to find out more about you and your books, where could they do that?
They can go to my website, which is www.amyandrews.com.au. Don't forget the .au. Oh, actually, if you just Google me, I come up as first on the rankings anyway. But also, look, I interact every day on my Facebook page. So if you go search for Amy Andrews, author on Facebook, you'll find me. Always I'm there, most of the day. And that's where you can find out most of my updates. You can join my newsletter, and I'm also on Instagram, which I love the best. It's my favorite social media platform. So I'm also on Twitter as Amy Andrews Books. You can hit me up there as well. I'm kind of all over. I'm everywhere, really. You name it, I'm there.
That's brilliant. It's been such a pleasure chatting to you today. I wish you every success with all of your books and every endeavour. Thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful. It was really, really nice to talk to you.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.